My name is Tony Sarmiento, and I'm Executive Director of Senior Service America. We provide, we're funded by the Labor Department to provide jobs for low-income older people around the country under the Older Americans Act, Title V. Some of you know the Senior Community Service Employment Program. Has anyone heard of that? And so we operate it in 16 states. But one of the things I've also done is I've been active in the American Library Association. At one point I chaired a committee of library services to an aging population. And I've been a big fan of libraries. I've been a library groupie since about 1990, having gone to a number of the annual meetings. And I just can't say enough about the role of libraries in keeping our society, the kind of society we envision, we think America ought to be about. And also, it's an institution that plays a unique role in serving all kinds of people, and particularly older people. So this whole workshop is to try to make sure that those of you who are in the aging network, and just by the introductions, many of you are, to remember that it's part of our job, particularly if we're federally funded, to think of how do we bust through our silos and work with other parts of the public networks as well as the nonprofit sector. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to start with a little framework that I think is a helpful framework in terms of defining isolation among older adults, and it's drawing from a recent report by the AARP Foundation. Then I'm going to be followed by Maura O'Malley, who is here from Lifetime Arts, and she'll tell you much more about her project, which involves getting professional artists and public libraries in a partnership to serve older adults. Started in Westchester and has expanded to a number of states around the country, funded by the Institute for Museum and Library Services, which is the small federal agency that provides most of the federal support to libraries. Then Molly Raphael will follow Maura. Molly is the immediate past president. You were president of the American Library Association in 2011 and 2012, is that right? And retired from the Multnomah County Library System in Portland. Before that, she was head of the DC Public Library, where I grew up. And I still owe some dues there. There's some overdue books. And then we'll hear from Charles Benton, who's the CEO and president, CEO and chair of the Benton Foundation. And the Benton Foundation has done terrific work around telecommunications policy, such as universal broadband. And Charles also wears a couple hats in the library world. He was chair of the first White House Conference on Library and Information Services in 1979, appointed by President Carter. And he's a recidivist. He's now on the, President Obama has appointed him to the National Museum and Library Services Board. So Charles will be looking and hearing the presentations and sort of looking at these ideas from at least a couple of lenses. One is as someone who cares deeply about making sure that all Americans have access to the internet and all the implications of that, but also what does this mean for libraries? And plus, Charles just celebrated his 82nd birthday, so he has some standing when it comes to talking about what it means to be an older person. That's correct, right?
That's right.
All right. So why don't we start with what could be a killer of a presentation, because it is heavily academic, but I think it's an important framework that the AARP Foundation has done. And so who's familiar with the AARP Foundation? Great. So you know that they've divided up in the last few years in these 4 areas: housing, income, hunger, and isolation. And the first 3 areas, they were very disciplined. They sort of looked at the literature and they said, okay, from this, and they came up with a definition. And from a definition, then they said, this is how many older adults are vulnerable with a housing problem, with an income insecurity problem, with a hunger problem. Isolation was one that it took a while longer. And you'll see from this framework, in terms of their defining isolation, how tricky it is. So I want to make sure, let's say, who's a ringer here? Who's actually looked at this issue of isolation among older adults as a phenomenon? We have one student, right? Have you studied this as part of your?
Yeah, as part of the evidence-based practice project.
And you also back there?
Yes, not so much research study, but I mean it's an ongoing issue with us, and especially looking at the whole picture of health and wellness. I mean, a lot of reasons why people do things is to avoid isolation.
And you're with are you with the AAA?
No, it's similar. It's a tax levy-based senior program.
Okay, so you're a part of the publicly funded aging network, aging services network, and you're seeing isolation as something that's important as you do your work. So what the foundation did was they engaged a little company called ResearchWorks to develop a framework, and they essentially did a pretty thorough review of the scientific literature, and they interviewed a handful of experts. And then in middle of last year, they issued a report called Framework for Isolation in Adults Over 50. So here are the objectives of what they're trying to do. So this is the first of what probably will be several reports. We're trying to get a grip on what is the current state of research across multiple disciplines, including identifying gaps in the research related to isolation among adults age 50 and over. They wanted to synthesize the literature, resulting in a unifying definition of isolation, and I'll leave it up to you whether they were successful when you look at this definition. Delineate the various measures and indicators of isolation and risk for isolation. Identify promising directions and needs for future research. Any good researcher always has that as their work right at the end, say, well, there needs to be more research, and give me the money, I'll be happy to do it for you. This PowerPoint is up on the ASA website, I think, and if someone has trouble downloading it, you're welcome to leave me a card and I'll send it to you. Inform future study of isolation within the 50-plus population. So, what did they find? They found out that there were a number of disciplines that have looked at isolation: psychology, social work, public health, public policy. Second, there is considerable variety in the ways in which researchers in the field have described, defined, and measured isolation, approach to the design of interventions and the evaluation of studies of interventions, and conceptualize how isolation happens. And this is an important point. Much work remains to be done to improve the state of these three areas, which I think in many ways it says, you know, we're at the beginning of trying to even understand what this is. Third, it's difficult to determine the prevalence of isolation among 50-plus adults due to the variations that were described earlier, the lack of research with representative samples in general, and comparable representative samples in particular. So someone's T is just being good. And here we are. So they actually came up with a number. However, current estimates indicate that isolation could impact up to 17% of Americans aged 50 plus, which means about 18 million persons. So let me just stop there and say, does anyone have a thought on that? Does that ring true with you? Is it smaller, bigger in your view in terms of older adults and isolation? Yes?
It rings true because, especially for women, so many of us are widowed in older age, and our kids have been socially mobile and geographically mobile, so it really
So it rings true for you in southwestern Missouri?
Well, actually, when I was at a AAA in the Denver area, then we found that was the #1 complaint in a rural county was loneliness, which is a component of social isolation.
So, and your work with repeating this for the microphone, so that in Denver, your experience with the AAA seems to also...
in a rural county under which we lived.
Okay. Any other? Yes?
I think 17% is low. Because I know isolation is one of the key factors and risk factors in elder abuse, and all the figures are way, way low.
So you think that 17% is low, particularly when you look at the experiences around elder abuse. So the fourth, now here's the definition. It's good social scientists, right? Here's what they propose as the unifying definition of isolation: the experience of diminished social connectedness stemming from a process whereby the impact of risk factors outweighs the impact of any existing protective factors. A person's lack of social connectedness is measured by the quality, type, frequency, and emotional satisfaction of social ties. Social isolation can impact health and quality of life, measured by an individual's physical, social, and psychological health, ability and motivation to access adequate support for themselves, and the quality of the environment and community in which they live. Any immediate reactions? You were shaking it.
Hard to operationalize.
Hard to operationalize. That's one comment. Anyone else? Any thoughts? Yes.
I was happy to see it include quality and the emotional satisfaction. A lot of times people talk about socialization and it's just go out and be with people, but there's not a lot of content of, is this emotionally satisfying?
So the idea of quality, which of course then, makes the quantitative researchers go crazy, I suppose. But you like to see that because in the real world that is important. So other findings. Isolation in adults age 50 plus occurs due to a complex set of circumstances and factors that exist at the individual, social network, community, and societal levels. I think here's one place where it clearly is showing, no, if we look at all we learned from the various disciplines, it can't be just boiled down to an individual problem. The primary risk factors associated with isolation are living alone, mobility or sensory impairment, major life transitions, socioeconomic status, that is low income, limited resources, being a caregiver for someone with severe impairment. Additional factors are psychological or cognitive vulnerabilities, their location, rural, unsafe, or inaccessible neighborhood and communities, small social network and or inadequate social support, language, non-English speaking, and membership in a vulnerable group. Isolation can also be triggered by following major life-changing events, such as a change or loss of social network, social role, physical health, mental health, or resources. There's a great deal of diversity among intervention designs, target populations, and outcome measures for interventions. So they saw a number of group and one-on-one interventions. And what they saw was that most of the interventions were implemented with people living in community settings as opposed to residential care settings. Just stop here. Is this surprising to you, this second bullet about community settings as opposed to residential care? I thought it was interesting somewhat, and I should look at the study again, because maybe the assumption there is that if you're in a residential care setting, a senior home, that there's less isolation there than in a community setting, and I see some heads shaking. That's not quite the real world.
I'm also
Yes.
surprised just because to do a community intervention is harder work, so kudos to them that they're doing that.
All right, so that is interesting. Yeah, one would think that you could actually do programs in a nice organized senior home, they're all there, as opposed to finding people who are isolated, withdrawn, and how do you even reach everyone who is at risk. These interventions have aimed to reduce loneliness and or depression, increase social network size, improve quality of supports, and increase frequency of social contacts. So for a full copy of the report, you can go to the website of AARP. And I find, frankly, the website to be so big. It's hard. I know there's stuff there, and it's sometimes hard for me to find it. I would just make sure you try to do the search function. Look for Framework for Isolation. And again, if you have any trouble, please, you're welcome to let me know. Reach out to me. So our next presentation is from Mauro O'Malley, the co-founder and president, CEO of Lifetime Arts. And last year, the AARP Foundation awarded a grant to Lifetime Arts for their Creative Aging Public Libraries project to help public libraries across the country, and you'll tell us which states, initiate, implement, and sustain creative aging programs. And you've also gotten funding from IMLS,
Yeah.
right? So, again, this is a project of national significance that has received both private funding as well as public funding. So with that, Maura, let me see if I can help you by finding your presentation. Let's see. Yeah, we'll take one quick one now.
I was just wondering if substance abuse was addressed in some of the clauses.
In the ARP framework? I'd be surprised if it wasn't, but it is interesting it didn't appear to come up as a specific risk factor. Let's see. This is it? Oh, here we go. And then it's Iris.
Thanks. Thanks everyone for coming. And Lifetime Arts is a not-for-profit arts service organization, so it's kind of unusual for us to be at an ASA conference, but it's actually not the first time because we work specifically in the area of promoting creative aging. We're an organization that is 5 years old, and we're very tiny. My partner Ed Friedman and I started the organization as a result of being professional arts people in the New York City region. Ed was the deputy director of the Bronx Council on the Arts for 25 years, and I had a 25, 30-year career in arts education and public policy development in artist training, school reform initiatives through the arts, that kind of thing. But about 10 years ago, I became a caregiver to my mother and to my aunt. And Ed also had a second parallel career as a social worker and ran lots of caregiving programs in the Bronx. And what happened is that we began to realize that as we were taking care of people who were aging, that there was a lot of work that wasn't happening, and that the arts weren't connected to the aging population. So we actually started Lifetime Arts only 5 years ago. And what I'm going to talk to you about is the work that we do. We've actually positioned ourselves as a service organization. Most arts organizations are sort of programming organizations. They develop programs, they market their programs, they sell their programs, community-based. But what we found is that there's a huge need to actually build the infrastructure for this field of creative aging. So what are we talking about by creative aging? This is who we are. We're basically dedicated to promoting the inclusion of professionally conducted arts programs in organizations that serve older adults. And the other piece of this is to prepare artists and other stakeholders to actually do this work and to foster lifelong learning. So we're in the lifelong learning world. We're based in New York City. And I'm just going to set this work a little bit in the context of, all of you know, I think, what's happening about the aging population. As an arts organization, and as arts people who are actually involved in public education, we thought, what is this about aging? We didn't know very much about it. Who's aging? And what we've learned is that everybody's aging. We're all in the same club. Nobody's exempt. In K-12 arts education, it stops at age 18. So teaching artists are focused on K-12 arts education. Community organizations, agencies, funding organizations are focused on the youth. But everybody grows up and continues to grow. And these demographics are making a huge shift in how community-based organizations are responding to the change in the demographics. So who are we talking about? Who are the people that we're talking about that are making this enormous change? Well, they're all of us. They're all of our kids who are, by 2030, you're going to be in there. They're going to be part of this group. So the impact of this enormous change is that there's been a shift in the idea about aging. What is aging? What does it mean? And it's been a positive shift from negative problems, the isolated, vulnerable, problem parts of the world and our lives, to thinking about aging as an area and a time of life for opportunity, for engagement, for learning, for experimentation. This is Ed here, actually, Ed Friedman, who, and he's there with Teresa, who at age 77 had her very first solo art show on City Island. As you know, there are all these amazing changes in how organizations and communities and government are responding to what do we do with old people, who are old people. It's a huge population, it's a 50-year span. All kinds of people. It's not just frail, institutionalized elderly. It is all of us. It is our siblings, our parents, and there are some great opportunities that are addressing how to serve older adults. So in this big context of positive aging and looking at aging as a time of life for growth and opportunity, the role of the arts plays a very significant part. And this field of endeavor called creative aging is really about 10 years old. There have been pockets of great activities around the country with great programs happening, but there's no infrastructure to support it or to share best practices and policies. No opportunity until recently to begin to develop a professional area of practice. So what we're talking about is instructional arts programs in terms of what we at Lifetime Arts promote. So that means learning in a supportive environment, learning skills, all art forms, and we're talking about all disciplines, not just the visual arts, we're talking about performing and literary arts as well, and all of that encompasses. And we're talking about building skill over time in a supportive environment. So it's not passive entertainment. Which traditional arts programming, when you think about, if you put arts programming and older adults together, what do you get? You get gluing macaroni on cardboard, you get stringing colored beads, you get mindless, basically mindless disrespect that is perpetuated in a lot of organizations, often in organizations that are devoted to serving older adults. So it is very active engagement. These are actual films, these are actual images of work that has been happening over the past 5 years in public libraries through creative aging. So this work is based on a study that was done by Gene Cohen at George Washington University in DC about six years ago. And it was basically a study that took place in 3 cities across the country. It lasted for 3 years. They served 300 older adults in professionally conducted instructional arts programs. And this is what happened as a result of this. There were actual benefits, medical measurable benefits in level of activity, scales of depression, and fewer doctor visits. And this is in a group of people, the average age was 80. In that population, there is a normal and expected decline in all of these areas, and in fact, this group experienced increase in growth and benefits in all of these areas. And they had a great time. So 2 of the key findings of Cohen's research were the ideas of mastery and social engagement. So mastery, we don't mean, developing the next Picasso or Bruce Springsteen. We mean actually learning something new, building skills over time. The other piece of social engagement, as somebody mentioned earlier, it's not sitting around shooting the breeze. It's not just showing up at a place. It's actually engaging around the work. It's intentional social engagement. And in successful creative aging programs, professional teaching artists create an environment where people are actually come together around the learning. And so there's an environment that is supportive, where people can take risks, where people can become engaged and learn things. In this picture, this is one of my favorite pictures. I'll tell you this quick story. This is taken from the Morris Park Library in the Bronx, very Italian neighborhood. And a woman came to the librarian and she said, "My father, as he gets older, is getting more and more isolated. He won't come out anymore. He only speaks Italian. Is there anything at the library that you think he might become engaged in?" And we happen to be funding a basic drawing program, an observational drawing program. And the librarian, who knew her patrons, who knew her neighborhood, said, one of the guys who shows up all the time is an older Italian gentleman. He speaks the language. Your father might become friends with him. And these two guys became friends. And what happened at the end is that Fordham University, Ravison Center on Aging did basically an evaluation on the impact of this work on the quality of life of older adults. Because the funding source, which was a private funder, was interested in, not in arts, not in libraries, in the quality of life of older adults. And one of these guys, in response to why this program was important to him, he said, sometimes you get scared that your mind is slipping. And drawing brings it back up again. And you know that your brain is working and you'll be okay. That's a pretty amazing nugget there about the value of engaged learning, and specifically in the arts. All kinds of stories about, you know, when people are painting or drawing or singing or writing, everything else falls away. Their problems fall away. So these are just some of the, you know, important aspects of creative aging. And they're in the big picture of creative aging, which is a relatively new field of endeavor. There are 3 areas of practice. Health and wellness, there are some wonderful interventions, wonderful work going on in hospitals and medical situations for people with Alzheimer's, cognitive disabilities. Great work going on. This includes art therapies. Civic engagement and intergenerational program is a huge area of importance and growth in this world. The arts play a very big role. There's some wonderful work going on in that regard as well. Lifelong learning, which is where our work fits in, is the 3rd area. One of the very interesting things about this work is because this field encompasses and covers several different sectors, the funding for it has been varied and significant. We actually, amazingly, because this touches so many different sectors, it's about the arts, it's about aging, it's about community cultural development, it's about health, it's about libraries and library practice. So the funding sources have been significant and have been, funders are actually calling us. Unbelievable. For a not-for-profit arts organization to get a phone call from a funder. Unbelievable. So, and we started, until last year, we ran this organization out of an extra bedroom in my house. So we're onward and upward. So the libraries project, we started immediately in 2008 when we basically became a 501c3. And the basic goals are to improve the quality of life of older adults through professionally conducted instructional arts programs, to build the capacity of public libraries to do this work. Traditionally, public libraries have looked at seniors or older adults in 2 ways, sort of adult programming, which includes, and Molly, you can correct me on this, exhibits, performances, book clubs, one-shot kind of cultural programming things. And then the outreach department, which includes prisoners, homeless, at-risk youth, and old people. Sort of the needy, marginalized section of the population. And what has happened as part of our work is that there's been a kind of a different take on who is, in fact, this population of older adults, and how do libraries respond to providing new services that meet the needs and have meaning for them. So we provide a lot of technical assistance and professional development. You know, so many of us work in silos. Librarians are so overworked. I mean, libraries are suffering terribly in terms of staff cuts and budget cuts. So taking on new programming is difficult, and we've developed a capacity building project that actually, through partnering with professional teaching artists, the resources of the library are expanded. So the other big piece of this is that we disseminate this information. We partner, the American Library Association's Public Programs Office is a main partner, and they help us to disseminate this information through their online programming, library.org, and also they're helping us to mount a full-day conference training at their conference in June. Part of also what we're doing right now with funding from IMLS, which is the Institute for Museum and Library Services, is that we are developing an online training toolkit for public librarians. And it's an interactive, we're going to launch that in June at ALA. It's an interactive online, it's actually a separate website that has all kinds of resources and downloadable templates and information that librarians can use to develop and implement this programming. The other thing that we're doing right now, we have a grant pending with IMLS, and that is to do a national rollout of this organization. Right now, we're in 4 states. In New York State, the New York State project, which is funded by IMLS, is looking at how to implement this program in different library systems, rural, suburban, and urban systems, all of which have very different structures. I was telling Molly earlier, I always thought that public education was the most complex bureaucracy. It is not. Public libraries get the prize. They have more levels and more consortiums and more regional whatevers than anything. It's quite amazing. So, and every single one of them functions differently. New York City alone has 3 completely independent library systems. So, so we're developing a network, because one of the things that happens is that there's great work happening around this adult arts cultural programming in public libraries, but it's not very connected. So we're trying to develop an affiliate network where librarians and other stakeholders in this work can share information, can be trained, can develop new resources, and that's coming on. So why libraries? Libraries are in every community. They're age neutral. They're welcoming to older adults. Older adults feel comfortable there. They're free. There are no economic barriers. They're in every single community. They're accessible. In many, many communities, they are the only cultural entity, sometimes for 100 miles around. There are lots and lots of them everywhere. Right now, these are our current partners. We also have funding through MetLife Foundation. MetLife has internally joined their healthy aging and their cultural arts programming to create a funding stream for creative aging. They fund creative aging programs through community-based organizations, through the National Guild for Community Arts Education, and in this library project, they wanted to see what happens if we brought this model outside of New York. So we're in Miami, Boston, and Dallas through MetLife. One of the very interesting things that's happening with our work with AARP, we've been introduced to some other wonderful organizations that are working around the area of isolation. AARP is interested in this work because what happens in these public library, what happens in a public library when these programs take place, because they're socially intentional, there's social engagement there. The teaching artist models behavior, models constructive criticism, sets people up so that they work together, so they're coming together around the work. So AARP acknowledges and recognizes that this work actually fights isolation. We had a situation in one of the choruses that we ran on Staten Island at the culminating event. 2 people in their early 80s announced their engagement. So this kind of thing happens. I mean, this is what happens. And the other thing, the great thing about public libraries is that anybody can show up. And everybody does show up. And they come with no prior experience in the art form. They come with a willingness to dive in head first. You might have 20 people in a room and they're from 55 to 98 years old. They never in a million years would have met before, but they're coming together around the work, whether it's writing their memoir, learning to do the Roomba. All kinds of amazing things happen. And the programs are designed with the librarian, who actually, we help the librarians to survey their patrons, to look at their facilities. It's sort of nuts and bolts, practical guidance about how you make this stuff happen. How do you get it funded? How do you promote it? How do you recruit people? How do you reach out to your neighborhood and see what's happening down the block? It's like the Mr. Rogers model. Who are the people in your neighborhood, you know? And you have to find out, a librarian and an artist need to know what's happening, because you don't want to offer, and this has actually happened, you offer a memoir writing project because everybody thinks that older adults have to look back. So memoir is a big focus. It's very important, very powerful. Everybody's got a story to tell, but that's not the only thing. A lot of older adults come to these programs because they don't want to think about their past. They want to learn something new. They want to move forward. So there's all kinds of things that happen, but we did have a program where the librarian figured memoir is the way to go. I'll offer a memoir writing project. It was in a part of Brooklyn that had a very, very active synagogue that regularly offered memoir writing projects. So nobody showed up at the library. So it's a matter of community mapping, finding out who's there, what resources, who are the artists in your neighborhood, what are people interested in. But through AARP, we met Self-Help Incorporated, which is a community-based organization in New York City. It started 70, 80 years ago as a service organization to help victims of the Holocaust resettle in the United States and find a way through. They have developed an amazing, as part of their Innovative Senior Center program through the World Health Organization's Age Friendly Initiative, they've developed a new computer interface for at-home isolated older adults. Basically what it is, and they have funding from IBM and Consumer Technologies, they've created, they basically put a device, computer device, in an older adult's home. They train them to use it. The interface is a touch screen. There's no keyboard, there's no mouse. The training to get to use it is an hour and a half. And what it does is it actually Skypes, connects people at home to active live workshops and activities in the senior center. It's an amazing process, and I've seen it in action. And there's a screen like this, and there might be 15 people on that screen, and whoever's talking, they're the bigger image, and everybody in the room can talk to them. They can share work. They can do this. So Self-Help is interested in improving their programming or offering more kinds of programming. You know, there's tax fraud, you know, credit card fraud, Medicaid stuff, all the sort of nuts and bolts and problems of older adults. But there's also active engaged learning. So we're going to actually model this interface and this virtual program in 2 public libraries in Queens this spring. So that at home, by the end of June, there'll be 300 older adults who actually have this equipment in their homes, who are trained, who will be able to choose basically a menu of services. They can pop into the menu, into the Memoir program, or the theater program, or the singing program. And so we're going to model that this spring. We've done a lot of evaluation of this work, impact on older adults' quality of life, also the impact on library practice. These are just some of the things that people say. People say amazing things, and it does change lives. It's also very cheap. These programs, on average, whoops, hello. We're lost.
Did we lose the signal?
I guess so.
Let's see. There we go.
Oh, good. Oh.
It's this.
Okay. Now I lost my train of thought. But anyway, it's pretty amazing what's happening. And I just want to show you, just so that you get a picture of what this work is about. It's a little 4-minute video that you can hear from the people directly who do this work, who are involved in this. Let's see if this works. Whoops. That's very frustrating. Oh, right, thank you. It was cheap. On average, you know, first of all, one of the things is that professional teaching artists are paid for their services. Is that it? And so that's another thing, is that we help librarians figure out how you do that, because they're not used to paying over a long period of time. These programs can be 3 months, 4 months long. But on average...
Do you know how to...
This to me was a haven away from home. So it got me to be alive again and think and to be. So it can't be any better than that.
To a certain age, people treat you as invisible. Here, you're very visible. You're on show, you're doing the whole thing. Your old self comes back again.
You know, we all have our problems, you know, age concerns, issues. It's slowed a bit serious, yeah. And as the class went on, people got more lighthearted. We talked to each other. Folks started looking younger, acting younger, like kids again, you know, so we're kids again.
And as for me, our teacher is very dedicated
Oh, you look
and
lovely.
is a beautiful teacher, and I learned a lot from her. When I joined this class, I didn't know how to hold the brush even. She taught me everything, and I'm very happy with my work.
Yeah, there was tremendous progress. I mean, some of the people in the beginning actually would come up in a scene exercise and would just stand there, and because they'd be in their heads, and they would feel like, oh, the class is judging me, I'm so dumb, I don't know what to say, I'm not creative, I'm not an actor, I've never done this, and that the chatter mind would just, you know, they would feel defeated. And so we would work hands-on with kind of removing judgment and allowing sort of that childlike playfulness to emerge. And then when they came out, it was like, wow!
It's been a long time since I traveled the train. I got a subway fever, already feeling the pain. Just waiting in line for it to come my way. I can feel the train coming. I can hear it in my brain.
I came here feeling very, very sad over something that happened in my life, and we've done it how many weeks? 9 now?
9 weeks. Yeah.
9 weeks. In 9 weeks, I put on makeup. Here I am. I'm happy. Yeah, and it made a big difference in my life.
George is a good friend of mine now, and we just met in this class.
Yes.
So painting brings together friendships.
So when I came into the group and began to listen to the women, and we realized how similar our backgrounds were, the more we talked, the more we shared our experiences, the more commonality I found. Very rarely do I speak of the celebrity of my family. Very rarely do I speak about my late son, Malik Sealy, who played for the NBA for 8 years. And this is really because, in my opinion, it skews things just a little. But in any event, as we went on, and we were together, I'd say for about 7 or 8 weeks, I began to think perhaps this is the group that could listen to my story and not make a judgment. Just understand that this was a person who had had a particular experience in her life, and she was willing to share it. And that's why I was able to share, for the first time on writing, the experience of losing my son.
We would get together, and as we would sing, whatever was going on in our lives would melt away, and we were able to just get into the song, the words, the music, and just be able to just lift our hearts. And I think for a lot of people, that's a really good thing to do for yourself.
None of us are allowed to be children in this world.
Yeah.
In this room, you're allowed to be a child.
Yes.
We all took their inner child and brought it to the fore and learned to play with it again.
Yeah.
And if we can just hold that inner child in life, those minutes of joy build up, and eventually you've had a whole day of joy.
Thank you. I must say that, just personally, it's the most fun I've had in a job in my whole life, and it's getting better every day because, you know, though we focus on sort of the practical nuts and bolts and how you get this stuff done, this is why we do it, because it makes a big difference in how people go forward. Thank you. You had a question? Yeah.
Yeah, you had mentioned earlier on that I think you said some libraries are doing outreach to the marginalized people in the communities and so forth. And I was wondering if there's any formal structure around that you're aware of.
Any
formal structure around the outreach? Is that something
Sure,
that
public
is sharing from library to library?
Usually, well, Molly probably can answer that better, yeah. But go ahead.
There is. It's often developed at the local level so that you see programs that are similar in different libraries, and they share and learn from each other, but they almost always ground what they're doing in the local level first. So it depends on what exists locally and where are the opportunities to actually reach out into those places. Yeah. I'd be glad to talk to you more about the individual situation if you want to do that after.
Great, thank you.
Okay, now I'm going to be technically challenged here because I switched to a Mac not long ago and got very comfortable with this idea of there's a presentation mode. for the presenter that you look at on the screen while the rest of you look at this, just the slide that's up there, but we couldn't get it connected. So I have to remember to switch this one as well as switch this one, so I know where I am on both of them. So I hope you'll bear with me. And the nice thing about it is it also has a timer clock, so it'll tell me how long I'm talking. We've talked a little bit about this already, I think, in terms of the sort of, I've used the break in the century to sort of say, this is the way we did it in libraries in the 20th century, and now this is the way we're doing it in libraries in the 21st century. And I think Mara has presented a wonderful example of the kind of thing that we're doing in the 21st century. But if you look back to what we were doing to serve what we then were talking about as senior citizens in the community, it was much more about services in libraries that were just sort of standard services, but we would serve seniors in those libraries. We did a lot of work and continue to do work to people who are homebound, individually homebound, where we actually deliver books and materials and other things to people, and now through technology as well as deliver outreach services to nursing and retirement homes. Again, that idea of a concentrated population of senior citizens, as we were talking, and how we would deliver programs through bookmobiles and other kinds of things like that. Particularly also focus on people with disabilities, so we're very conscious of people who were losing their eyesight, people who were losing their hearing, and what did that mean. Libraries have access to materials that are talking books that are not just the books on tape and then the books and then the audio books that we all have now, but long ago we're able to serve people with disabilities. And I would say we had a much more kind of monolithic view of aging and what aging meant within our communities. And I put that mostly at the bottom because I don't want you to think that we weren't paying attention to other things. But if I had to characterize it, I would say that what we were doing in the 20th century was much more this kind of approach. So now if we go to the 21st century, we're really shifted some now. It's not that we've stopped doing some of those other kinds of things, but we may be doing them in slightly different ways. And we're looking at how do we add the asset approach rather than just the deficit approach. So libraries have become very much in the 21st century centers for community and civic engagement. This is a really high priority for us now. If you think about how we've lost those spaces, those third spaces in our lives. We have home, work, and that third space for gathering, for people coming together. Libraries are very important, and public libraries in particular have really recognized that that's a primary role that they play in their communities. So that connection to community and engagement with civic environment, whether it's a rural community or a large urban area, has been very much a part of how libraries have been looking at their services and their programs. We also have a changing view of older adults in that fact that when we start talking about the 50-plus generation, the diversity from 50-plus is huge in people, and diversity in all dimensions that we're talking about. So we're looking at older adults in terms of who are the people in our communities and looking at how much more diverse this population is and how different phases of aging have an impact on how people might be using and benefiting from library services. Another fairly standard approach in libraries now is to actually engage older adults in the program planning. In other words, it's not all about what we think and observe as we're out there in the community, but we actually get people to help us plan the kinds of programs that would have appeal. This has been done for a long time with teen advisory boards, for instance. We learned a long time ago that it was a whole lot better to plan programs for teens if we involved teens in that planning. So we've learned that lesson also about older adults. So as we do this, we again bring people in from the community to involve them in the program planning. And I'd say this is really based on that kind of open-ended look about life. People are retiring earlier. They're looking at a large number of years that they have in front of them, and what can they do in those years, and how are the ways that they can engage in those different opportunities. So just a few examples. There are a lot of traveling exhibits that have come through the American Library Association, but these are not, they're funded usually by NEH or NEA. They are not just exhibits that are put up and people come and look at them. Libraries take the opportunity to do a whole lot of programming all around those different exhibits. So this is Bainbridge Library in Ohio. This was a traveling exhibit on Jewish songwriters, and there was a lot of programming. But what I liked particularly about this slide was this sort of level of intensity of different people as they're looking at the exhibit. That's really what they're doing in this particular picture. This next one is another one where you see a lot of this sort of small group interaction around these exhibits. Again, another exhibit on Abraham Lincoln and the Emancipation Proclamation, traveling exhibit to Baxter County Public Library in Arizona. That's where this picture was taken, where there's actually somebody who's talking about some of the things that are in the exhibit and engaged with the people who are there. So what are the approaches that we have been using in libraries as we've been going forward here? Computer access and digital literacy is a huge priority in libraries in general. And from the beginning, when we started bringing computers into libraries, we started realizing there were lots and lots of people who had not had any experience in school or in work to work with computers. Many of those individuals were older adults. And for a while, I think many older adults might have said, well, I don't need to learn this. And then they got hooked because so much of our world is based on technology now. So we've had a lot of libraries which have developed programs for training people on using digital resources and equipment. And for older adults, that often means just even beginning to learn how to use a mouse. Very simple kinds of things. So libraries will say, okay, let's set up a course that's specifically set for older adults and for the very beginning level. And this is often with volunteer trainers. People in the technology field often are willing to come in and volunteer their time. And they actually set up a series of classes to bring people up to the level that they want to be involved in. So computer access, digital literacy, very important. Older adults sharing expertise. This is a great resource for libraries, a great opportunity for us to recognize that we have people in our community who now are perhaps retired, have an expertise that they're willing to share, and many of them are willing to do it on a volunteer basis. So when you're looking at this isolation issue, this is a really great way to engage older adults, and also they often turn into real discussions and sort of a series of workshops around particular issues. We work on programs that reach people where they are. There are a lot of people who are dealing with elder care. Mara was talking about her mother. A lot of people finding themselves suddenly in a place where they have to deal with elder care. So the kinds of work that we'll do in public libraries will look at what is important in the community and how do we help support the priorities that the community has to learn in new areas where and libraries will just partner with other organizations to do that. Collaboration with community, nonprofit, and government entities. We saw some, and I'll show you in a minute, some slides that sort of show this healthy lifestyle. There's also been a great focus on financial literacy. What are the issues that older adults have for investments? What are the issues that older adults struggle with around a variety of issues in the financial area? I mentioned the exhibits we have with high quality programming that goes with that. So this is an example of a volunteer trainer in a basic computer class in a library in New Jersey, working with older adults. This is Sharon Robinson, the daughter of the baseball legend Jackie Robinson, who was the speaker that went with this traveling exhibit. So again, this is the kind of programming that we would do around a traveling exhibit. What I liked about this was not only the expertise of an older person sharing with an audience, but also you can see this is a very diverse audience, intergenerational. draws together a lot of people. And again, usually these things are planned so that they aren't just someone speaking and the program's over and everybody goes home. There's a real opportunity for interaction in those places. Oops, sorry. There we go. Healthy lifestyle, definitely a priority that happens in libraries. Often libraries have good meeting room spaces that have movable chairs. And so these kinds of activities can take place in the library space. What I want to emphasize, and I think Mara touched on this, is the wonderful thing about libraries is that they're trusted entities within the community because they've been there for a long time, and usually people have had some good positive experiences there. They feel welcome and feel comfortable. But they're also in neighborhoods. And I will tell you, as a library director in Portland, Oregon, when I worked with people who were working with aging populations, one of the things that they valued so much about libraries was we were already in a community in places they did not have spaces. And they could deliver programs and things within those spaces in ways that they just couldn't do with their own resources. So continuing the common approaches that we have in doing this, creating digital communities. Mara, I was very interested in that example that you gave with self-helping. Libraries have actually started doing things on their websites where they create digital communities for parts of their communities. So they'll create some kind of blog area or something for a particular segment of the community that's interested in discussing different kinds of things. And as we look at the advantages of technology for how we can deliver services to people who are isolated and who can't necessarily get to programs in the library very easily, it's another way for us to actually be able to include people, is to be able to deliver those programs digitally. Volunteer opportunities, libraries have used volunteers for decades. What's different now is we're paying attention to how older adults want to volunteer. 30 years ago, when we had older adults coming in, many of them were very happy to have one day a week where they come in and 3 or 4 hours a day. For that day, they'd do some volunteer work for us, or every couple of weeks, or whatever they fit with their schedule. What we're now looking at is people who have active lifestyles, who want to engage in a particular project that they're interested in, and then they want to go off for 3 months, and maybe they'll come back and maybe they won't. Maybe they'll find some other volunteer work. So we're really look at how do we do that kind of volunteer work so that it's supportive to the lifestyle that people have. Intergenerational programs are very popular and important in libraries, crossing all kinds of generations. We have a lot of teens who will be tech assistants in libraries who help seniors use computers and technology. This role of libraries as centers for community engagement has become a higher and higher priority, I think, in the last few years. Libraries are really looking at, we've been doing some work in the American Library Association with the Harwood Institute, with this idea of engaging communities around their aspirations. Not, again, looking at deficits and needs so much, but really around aspirations. The last one I have is in helping people achieve those aspirations. Libraries actually becoming active players in this, helping communities move toward their aspirations, rather than being sort of more passive and reactive, but actually engaging in those areas. So here's a volunteer who's working one-on-one with a student at the Sunset Branch of the San Francisco Public Library on technology. Again, really meeting people where they are. You know, excuse the quality of this slide, but I have to tell you, I put it in here because I thought it had such good messages. Get out of the house, meet new friends, make a difference, feel useful, gain job skills. All of those things were appeals about how what volunteering at the library might be able to do for you. One of my favorites was the level of engagement of this woman. This is an harmonica concert at the Mountain Home Public Library in Idaho. and it was part of an exhibit of another traveling exhibit, but again an example of the kind of programming that goes along with it. With an harmonica, which I had to look up to find out what it was. I don't know about you, but it's bowls or glasses that are glass, and the sound that you make when you rub them. So it's you can see something that if you saw it in an exhibit, how excited you might get if you actually had the opportunity to play it yourself. So I just want to kind of finish up by talking about how important this collaborative approach is at the national level with the American Library Association and AARP Foundation around this issue of isolation. We think this is a terrific opportunity for libraries to become even more central in their communities, and a great opportunity to work with an organization that clearly has a lot of standing and a lot of resources to sort of help us figure out how to do this better than we have been doing it before. But remembering always that we're talking about delivery at the local level. So the American Library Association, where it does its best work, is where we get some kind of grant through a public program that goes through our public programs office that then goes out to applicants, local libraries all across the country who are eligible to do that. Smart Investing at Your Library is an example of that. That was a grant from FINRA, the Financial Investment Regulatory Authority Foundation, which is really helping us run some programs around smart investing and doing it for different age groups and different kinds of interests. And again, many examples of that already exist. And I think it's important to recognize that organizations like the Institute for Museum and Library Services can be key funders, such as they are in Mara's program, for making these programs go national. So we find something that really works at a local or regional level, and then ALA works with IMLS and with the local organization to create something that we can push to a national level. I'm going to skim through these quickly because I don't want to, I know we're running out of time. These are some examples, and this presentation will be up on the website. Transforming Life After 50 started in California and has become a national model. Senior Spaces in New Jersey was launched at the Old Bridge Library, but the idea of actually creating space that was for older adults in that library to focus on particular interest. Brain fitness has become a priority area in many parts of the country to talk about that. Minnesota has a project going on that, and the next chapter, Viral Aging for Older Adults in Massachusetts, again, another example. This is the web page for Transforming Life After 50 in California. This is the opening of Senior Spaces in the Old Bridge Public Library in New Jersey. Regional models, Lifetime Art's a great example for us here that's going to go national. I was involved in something called Life by Design Northwest in Portland, Oregon. That was a collaboration of many organizations in the Portland area: Portland Community College, Portland State University, Oregon Public Broadcasting, Hands On Portland, the volunteer coordinating organization for that area, AARP Oregon, and the Multnomah County Library that really focused on the 50-plus generation. The formality of that organization has fallen apart a little bit, but Portland Community College is carrying much of it forward. There's a lot of collaboration with libraries and universities. Also, again, a great resource for us in our communities are the scholars who are really interested in that kind of work out in the community. And we've had programs for years that have done that, but I think particularly when we're looking at some of the programs we're talking about for older adults. The volunteer opportunities, and then really looking at how do we break down the silos that we're in and look at the individuals and how we program and serve those individuals. That's just a university presentation. So future opportunities, I put it takes a village because I believe strongly that libraries are much stronger through the kinds of collaboration that we've been doing particularly in the last couple of decades, that when we look at what is it we're trying to accomplish and take a little bit of the library, you know, we are the library, but are willing to be much more part of a coalition, that we are most successful. So I look forward to questions and discussion, and I will be happy to also answer particular questions that you have.
I just have a quick question about the age 50 plus, because through the Aging Network it's defined as 60 plus. So is that something that libraries design? And then also, is that relevant to the funding, that you can say you're working with older adults and 50 plus will be the door opener?
I think 50 plus started because we started talking about the retirement of the baby boomer generation. And when we first started talking about this, the baby boomer generation was about hitting 50. I mean, that was when the talk was happening, and we were starting to see people retired at that age. I don't think it was a conscious effort to identify that. I've seen it as 55 plus. And what's often happened is something will start out that way, but instead we'll back it up and we don't even bill it that way. What happens is we push it out to the population that's 50 plus through the mechanisms we have to publicize things. But anybody's welcome at the program, so it often turns out to be right. Exactly. Yeah, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Charles, you're ready for comments? Sure. And Charles had some handouts. Anyone come in late did not get? Sure, go ahead.
I'm just wondering for anybody can answer. We're working with both the aging and disabilities community, and one of the issues that we're having is the ADA, you know, making our programs accessible. So we are embarking on putting a kiosk in our local library with the touch screen and all this. And I'm just wondering if any of you can address that. Since the ADA has come, you know, how do we make our work accessible? How are you working around that, through that?
ADA has been in libraries since ADA happened. Since we're publicly funded institutions, we have been very involved in making our libraries and our programs and our services accessible. Some libraries are much farther along than others, and there's a lot of investment also and interest at the state level. There's a state library in every state, and those state libraries have some responsibility for developing those kinds of guidelines and service expectations and those kinds of things. The American Library Association also has very active groups that work in the area of ADA and setting up guidelines. So I can give you some follow-up on that. If you,
yeah, because the programs come into the library. You know, even though libraries have the infrastructure, I'm just wondering about how, so we can chat about it. Thank you.
Charles Ben's going to give us a couple of perspectives from wearing a couple hats.
Well, thank you, Tony. A most impressive set of presentations, really. And I would like to just do two things. It's kind of R&R. Talk a little about some resources, and then a few reactions to what you've just a little R&R at the end here. And since we only have a little over 20 minutes, I'll try to wrap this up in 5 minutes so that will give us, and Tony, you, the opportunity to really field the questions and get the conversation going further. A wonderful panel, fabulous, with Tony giving the sort of isolation perspective for older folks. With Mara really giving, I think, an enormously exciting case study from the ground up, and what you've done with your vision and persistence, because this could not have been easy, is amazing. And and Molly's sort of ALA comprehensive perspective from the top down. So this is everything that's going on. I mean, just what a wonderful balance, and it's very exciting. So I want to talk about first some resources. The first thing that as a member of the IMLS, I actually was able to get their help, and they're the two handout sheets. One is a very interesting selected list of grantees of the LSTA Library Service and Technology Act, that's organized in the categories of the American Library Association, quotes guidelines for libraries and information services to older adults. So you look at the grants that have been made within those 7 categories. That's a very interesting resource. Really very interesting. Number 2, they did prepare a PowerPoint for this presentation, which I'm not using. But if you would like to have it,
we can upload it to the website.
Yeah, let's upload it to the website, and anybody that would like to have me to send it to them personally, give me your card afterwards, and I'll send that to you. IMLS is preparing a digital literacy toolkit with resources to assist librarians, libraries with the elderly. That also will be very, very interesting. You build a model, it really works. I'm a deep believer in model building that really works, and then the next big challenge is how you take it to scale. And that means focus, and you are really focused, and I love it. You are really focused. So the fact that there's going to be a June workshop at ALA or pre-conference setup is a next step. And the whole notion of your affiliate network, the Lifeline Arts affiliate network. And I loved your video too. I mean, the video, that 4 minutes video, you saw concretely.
I cry a lot actually at these events,
Yeah.
because there was a point when we first started where the first year we funded 8 programs. So we went to most of the workshops and we went to all of the culminating events. And they were amazing.
Yeah.
These are regular people from all kinds of
I mean, the Italian father, another old Italian, because he only wants to speak Italian.
Yeah.
Whoa. The people that announced their engagement.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah.
This is specific stuff, touching lives in a real way, and that's inspiring. That is inspiring. So I am really turned on by your model, and congratulations. It's fabulous. So, Molly, I've got one specific idea for you, because you threw a lot at us, and it's I love to zero in. The intergenerational programming idea. That's a really interesting idea. Now, the MacArthur Foundation has had a big project here in the Chicago Public Library with U Media, really trying to reach out to and empower teens with in creating the media and distributing it as in so many channels that are proliferating beyond our comprehension. But the U Media project now MacArthur has funded the next step in taking that Chicago model into 10 communities or 12 communities. It's all being done by the Urban Libraries Council. Susan Benton, no relation, but I love her. She's fabulous. The Urban Libraries Council, if you don't know it, which is based here in Chicago, has 130 members, which covers over 50% of the population, because the Chicago Public Library is 1 member, but I mean, that's the Chicago, that's a lot. But this really is one of the great innovative library organizations. And it seems to me that this notion of intergenerational programming, getting the teens not only to express themselves, which is very important, I mean, identity, crucial, but help others, and especially help older people, and connect with older people. That might be, you might be able to inject this idea into that project, and the person to talk to about that is Susan Benton. You ought to call her up, former head of ALA. I know what you're doing with U Media. Let's talk. Yeah, let's talk. Let's figure it out. So those are my 2 specific reactions. There's lots more, but those are my 2 specific reactions.
Stephen and Molly and Mark,
Yeah.
why don't we, because we want to make sure that your comments are
Sure.
heard on the cable show.
Great. Yep. We'll do that.
And so let's just get some questions or comments from what you heard. Very different presentations. I think very provocative. So let's start here. Just say your name and then just.
Okay, I'm Tom from the Vintage Senior Center in Pittsburgh, and I have a question for both Maura and Molly. Maura, have you had any of your projects involve senior centers?
Yes. Yes, through the libraries. Actually, many libraries.
That's even worse.
Thank you. I knew there was one of those. Thank you.
Many libraries actually in their outreach work partner with local senior centers. And in Brooklyn Public Library in particular has a department called Services to the Aging, and they routinely partner with local senior centers. It's always very interesting to do programming there because, you know, senior centers are really great at feeding people, and they're great at certain programs, but they haven't done a lot of sequential learning programs in the arts. So we've actually, it's a library-sponsored project that's developed with the librarian and a teaching artist, and then it happens in the local senior center. Very successful. One of the things, of course, is when you're partnering with an off-site location, it's the logistics of who's in charge. And
Thank you for saying
that.
Details.
And you know, and it's you know, who's the custodian, and when is lunch, and making sure that, you know, we actually, many programs in senior centers and also senior housing. We're just doing a project in White Plains where a brand new independent assisted living facility has been built, and they basically gave a grant to the local Westchester Library System to fund 2 creative aging programs in White Plains Public Library. And they're serving, half of the program is going to take place at the assisted living facility and half are going to take place in the public library. So
it's a collaboration.
absolutely, it's a collaboration, and it's got to be planned as a collaboration. Everyone's got to be, there has to be a planning meeting where all the parties are sitting down together and there's a common schedule delivered, and that the older adults are given a written document. You know, it's not like school where they have to show up Monday through Friday from 9 to 3. They have busy lives, and so there has to be, it's really important that information is distributed, large type, accessible reading, and that everybody's got the same schedule. And that everybody has someone to call if the program's canceled, if the artist is sick, if the library shuts down, if there's a snowstorm, whatever. So it's the logistics of, but they're very successful. And also that creates new partnerships between the public library and their local community organizations.
I have my question for Molly is, are you familiar with some collaborations between libraries and senior centers? We have a book club where the library comes to our senior center and does a book club. We've done art shows where our art class has gone to the library and exhibited. But have you ever had seen senior center classes take place maybe in a library in the evening or on a weekend? Or
I can't tell you specific ones, but I will tell you the way that libraries have been working with senior centers over really a number of decades, that sort of program planning has expanded. So it used to be just book delivery. We'll come, we'll bring books, maybe in a bookmobile, maybe we'll bring book trucks in, you'll get your books, you'll get your reading for 2 weeks, and then we'll come back 2 weeks later. And that moved to book groups and book discussions and to broader. And I think when I patted Maura and said, thank you for saying that, it's often what we find is a library that says, oh, we want to do this, let's go find the senior center over here, and the logistics of working with that senior center become so insurmountable that even though we want to do something there, we maybe can't. So what we do is we pay attention to, is there a change in leadership, is there a change in philosophy and mission in those places? And sometimes it's leadership from granting, from organizations that are giving grants to support that push that out. So again, we work often with local foundations to figure out how is it that we take what is your mission and what is our mission and figure out some way to bring them together into that local location. We have parts of the American Library Association that can answer those much more specific questions. So I'd be glad to sort of get you connected with the place that would be able to identify some of those specifics for you.
Charles, did you have anything you want to add?
Well, I just was thinking, you know, the ALA has had a children's subset and a children's library. I'm just wondering, has there been discussion about a new subset that would focus, given the demographics, shift in demographics and all the facts that we've had, that would be a specialized subset of ALA to focus on the older populations.
There's a, you know, ALA is very siloed like the rest of the world is, and there is what is now called the Reference and User Services Association, used to be called the Reference and Adult Services Division, which has a section, a very active section that Tony was talking about earlier that's very focused on older adults. Whether, how that is expanding from the let's go to nursing homes and retirement centers into this much broader view of older adults, I think that's evolving in different places within the association. We're trying very hard not to create a lot of new segments, because what we find is that the collaboration that the association can do well, it sort of breaks apart when we create all these individual units. So I think there's a lot of focus on that. I know the Public Library Association, for instance, has places, the Urban Libraries Council, which I did a lot of work with as well, and they do really wonderful work in the urban environments. ALA is a great place to really look at how do we spread this into small and rural communities. And I have to say, when I moved from Washington, D.C. to Portland, Oregon, and lived in a state that was had so many rural areas, I became very conscious about how do you take something to scale at an urban environment, and at the same time be thinking about how do you get that then delivered to those much less well-funded libraries that are in rural areas for with the resources.
Right. Well, just a last quick point. The structure of libraries, the library profession is phenomenal, and it is no, it's mysterious. I think is maybe a better word.
I've been a member of ALA for 40 years, and I'm still learning, so
right.
don't feel bad.
But focus is crucial, and just a specific that will help maybe to make my point. The first board meeting of IMLS that I attended in November of last year, the focus was the role of libraries in early childhood learning, which is really interesting, and it also ties in with President Obama's vision that he laid out in his State of the Union message about early childhood learning and universal kindergarten at least, but expanding the support for learning at an early age. And the role of libraries, the case study that was presented to us is a library in Virginia who had really focused in on a collaborative basis with early childhood learning, after school, summer programs, I mean organized in a really systematic way to complement the schools and what they were doing. So it was really preschool. It was education and learning, and especially with books, but learning in the preschool area. So how to get, whether it's a subunit of PLA, a Public Library Association, or whether it's this reference thing, but some real focus on the needs of older Americans. How to do that in a way that is coherent and understood and we'll get something done.
Let's see if we can squeeze two more questions. We got a question back here.
Hi. I know there's a lot of people who would love to take part in these programs, but they have no way to get there. Is there a transportation component in any of these?
It all depends on the community, because libraries are locally based. So if it's a municipal, many libraries are municipal agencies, part of the municipal system. So there are, in New York City, for instance, there's Access-a-Ride. It is an issue. It is an issue. That's why it's a big issue, and that's why age-friendly, livable communities, age-friendly initiatives, all of those are dealing with transportation for older adults, whether it's urban, suburban, or rural. So it is an issue, and that's also one of the interesting things about this virtual model of connecting people. If people can get to one location, it might not be the library, but they could virtually be in the library.
Because I love your programming, but I thought that could be a component of it, is, to have some kind of a network to get people.
This isn't, you know, this is one of the things that I was going to respond to you, is that there are conversations happening between IMLS, AARP, ALA, organizations like mine around these issues. Everyone's very aware of it, and try, you know, it's the top-down, bottom-up kind of model of how you make these things, how you develop the policy. You got to talk to the people who've got the money and have got the power at this level in order for anything to happen at this level. And so it does take a village. I mean, it takes all kinds of people. Everybody's, the conversations are starting, which is, you know, actually exciting.
The Administration on Aging, many of you may know, have a senior transportation project, and I think Easter Seals is the main organization. So let's talk afterwards. I'll be happy to give you contact. We have another question here.
I was going to ask a question, but I'd like to follow up on the comment that was just made in the back. And I had mentioned earlier in this event that we are doing what we call a kiosk for healthy living in our local library. And part of the element that we're adding to that, it's called travel counseling. So people volunteers and advisors will be there, and people can actually learn what the travel options are in the community and so forth. And we're actually trying to figure out ways to get them engaged at that point. And by the way, this project that we're working on was funded by a $50,000 grant that we got from NCST in the Easter Seals. So it's, you know, and we're hoping to roll it out on a statewide initiative. So the travel counseling role is really a big part of what we're trying to do.
NCST is National Center on Senior Transportation.
Yes.
And this is Massachusetts.
Yes.
One of the things that I've always, in recent years, been thinking about, this whole issue of livable communities and age-friendly initiatives. The people who aren't at that table, in my experience, are the K-12 population. The school districts, public school districts, are not at that table. Neither are the arts community. And I think those are two major people in every community. I live in Westchester County, New York. Every single town has its own school district, with the principal and with the vice principals and with everybody else. And then the next town, you know, 5 minutes away has the same setup. None of them are at this table about aging-friendly communities.
So
Kids aren't involved in interacting, you know, so but that's where this stuff happens. That's where transportation happens.
Yeah, I did have a question about the concept of what's been going on here. In our community, there's about 100,000 people. It's an urban city north of Boston. And at one time, I'd say about 8 years ago, there was a major, the main public library, and there were 3 branches. And due to budget cuts and so forth, and a perception that they weren't being used to their full extent, the 3 branches were closed and sold off, and the proceeds were used to enhance the main library. So I guess my question is, what is the national discussion around the actual capacity of libraries and the utilization of that capacity? Can you speak to that?
Funding is a huge issue in the public library area. It has been, it always rises during economic recessions because it's seen as a discretionary service rather than an essential service.
So the problem rises, not the funding.
The
problem goes up, not the funding.
Right. But what we've seen are some very promising outcomes to communities that have risen up and said, no, don't close, our libraries are too important. So when that whole thing I was talking about community engagement, really being embedded in the community in a way that's very powerful. What happens is sometimes elected officials think because they aren't hearing much about the library that nobody really cares. One of the really fine examples is Oakland, California. There was a proposal, several budget proposals, but one of them would have closed half the branch libraries in Oakland. And each community said, no, not us. Our library is too important. Even if it wasn't as well used as it might be, they saw that as central. And frankly, I think the community, the library supporters, educated the community about the value of the library in a really powerful way. We know from experience that when the community rises up, that's our best shot. What we want to do is get to that place where we're seen as essential. And I think some of these library systems have been able to sort of move themselves into that place. And they're at the planning table now and in discussion. So public libraries are really focused on this issue. What happens, and you know, it's unfortunate because they've closed the 3 branch libraries and sold them off, so it's not a question of. So this fight to keep branch libraries often has to do with, we know once we lose them, we may never get them back.
Right.
And communities have various reasons that they want and need branch libraries. And if you go by use, you'll find the wealthy neighborhoods keep their libraries and the poorer neighborhoods don't. But if you look at where are they most needed, where do they change lives dramatically, it's at in the poorer communities. So it's part of the reason that library systems tend to react as a library system, is you can't take this away without doing damage to the whole community.
That's a great, did you have
There's just
one more
thing I wanted
comment
to add to that, and that is the notion of libraries as community partners, because it's much harder to break a partnership apart than a single entity. And arts organizations survive through partnerships, always have. And so partnering with public libraries has always been partnering with anybody who will talk to them to survive. So public libraries and arts, you know, when public libraries begin to be seen as employment opportunities, for instance, for teaching artists, for other entities, other groups of people, their value increases, and also they're a critical part of community service, and arts organizations know that, other organizations know that. And the other big piece about public libraries that's really difficult from a programming and sustainability point of view is that public libraries can't charge for programs. That's one of the great things about public libraries. Is the greatest thing about public libraries, because that means nobody is denied access. It's also one of the most difficult things in terms of sustaining quality programming.
So this is really a great comment to close on. In many ways, I hope one of the other messages you got here is that we've got to build stronger alliances between the Aging Services Network and the public library system. We're both under tremendous pressure to serve greater numbers of people with smaller budgets, like the sequestration that looks like it's going to be permanent. And it seems to me that one of the great things that Molly did when she was president of ALA was to implore all librarians to say, if you consider yourself a professional in this field, then you've got to incorporate advocacy into your lifestyle, because that is how much our system is under threat. And I think it's also true for anyone who cares about aging services. And it is part of the Older Americans Act that AAAs have a specific role in promoting advocacy among older people. If we don't do that in our work, then we're out of compliance with the Older Americans Act. And here we are, we're debating about the reauthorization of the Older Americans Act. It's 2 years behind. So we've got to take advantage of this increased concern about the quality of life in our communities, the need to build partnerships across the public sector, certainly, but also with community organizations, or we're not going to have this conference or the institutions that we care about, and many people will be left unserved. So I want to thank the panel, Charles, Mara, and Molly, and thank you for your questions, and thank CAN TV for recording it.